In 1969, they changed Hollywood with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In 1973, they did it again with The Sting. But it wasn't until half a century later that Robert Redford admitted what Paul Newman truly meant to him. Early Hollywood paths cross. Robert Redford did not step into Hollywood as a star. In the late 1950s, he was taking whatever work came his way. Television shows like Maverick, Perry Mason, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents gave him quick appearances, often just one episode at a time. He was tall, blond, and had an edge that casting directors noticed, but he was far from a household name. Paul Newman, on the other hand, was already a fixture. By the early 1960s, Newman had Oscar nominations and leading roles in hits like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and The Hustler. Studios saw him as both a serious actor and a box office draw. Redford knew of him, but they were not yet in the same league. Their paths began to brush against each other when Redford broke into film. In 1962, he landed a supporting role in War Hunt, which caught attention at film festivals. The buzz led to bigger stage parts, including Broadway. By 1963, he was starring in Neil Simon's Barefoot in the Park, a performance that turned heads in New York. That same role led to the 1967 film version, placing him firmly on Hollywood's radar. By the mid-1960s, Redford and Newman had mutual friends in the industry. Directors, writers, and producers spoke of them in the same circles. Both men were athletic, sharp, and had reputations for not fitting the cookie-cutter mold of classic studio stars. Newman was famous for racing cars and blunt honesty, while Redford carried a rebellious streak mixed with a quiet intensity. The first serious talk of pairing them came from studio executives hunting for a project that could blend Newman's proven stardom with new blood. Redford's rise had been steady, but he still needed a defining role. Newman, confident in his position, had the power to suggest names, and Redford's was starting to surface. Although they had not yet met face-to-face, the groundwork was set. By the late 1960s, both men were circling a film that would change their careers. Butch Cassidy sparks chemistry. By 1969, Paul Newman was a Hollywood powerhouse. His mix of blue-eyed charm and no-nonsense acting had already made him one of the most bankable stars in the business. When Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid went into development at 20th Century Fox, the studio wanted a sure hit. Newman was locked in as Butch Cassidy. The question was, who would play Sundance? At first, the studio didn't want Robert Redford. Executives floated bigger names: Warren Beatty, Steve McQueen, even Marlon Brando. They worried Redford lacked star power. He had proven himself on Broadway and in smaller film roles, but he wasn't considered an obvious box office draw. Director George Roy Hill, however, had a different view. He saw Redford's intensity and restraint as the perfect counterweight to Newman's humor and warmth. Newman himself pushed for Redford. He had clout, and his backing helped turn studio hesitation into approval. Casting Redford as Sundance gave the film a dynamic contrast, one outlaw playful, the other cool and quiet. When shooting began in Mexico and Utah, the chemistry was instant. On set, the two actors built a rhythm that felt unscripted. Newman improvised lines. Redford matched him with subtle reactions. Crew members noticed how naturally they slipped into roles, cracking jokes between takes, then locking into character once the cameras rolled. The famous bicycle scene where Newman clowns around to the tune of "Raindrops Keep Fallin' on My Head" showed the lighter side. Later, shootouts revealed their ability to shift into grit and danger without losing that spark. Audiences responded. Released in September 1969, the film earned more than $100 million worldwide, a massive success for its time. Critics praised the pairing. Awards soon followed. The movie won 4 Oscars, though not for acting, and cemented both men as icons of the new Hollywood era. Instant brotherhood off-camera. The success of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid didn't just launch a classic film, it created a friendship that grew fast once the cameras stopped rolling. Paul Newman and Robert Redford found they had more in common than most Hollywood stars of their era. Both men preferred privacy. They hated the circus of Hollywood publicity and avoided the Beverly Hills party scene. Instead, they bonded over simple things, late-night card games, long conversations, and a shared love of outdoor life. Newman raced cars for fun and discipline. Redford, who had grown up in California, was passionate about skiing, hiking, and the wild spaces of the American West. That mix of competition and solitude became a foundation for their bond. They also had the same sense of humor. Crew members recalled how Newman teased Redford relentlessly during filming. Redford gave it right back, setting up small pranks that Newman loved. Their banter carried over to press interviews, where they often mocked each other in good fun. When asked about Redford, Newman once joked, "He's not bad looking for a kid." Redford answered, "Paul's okay, if you don't mind wrinkles." Audiences loved that chemistry, and the studios noticed. The friendship deepened outside work. They spent time together with their families. Newman's wife, Joanne Woodward, welcomed Redford as part of their circle, and Newman treated Redford almost like a younger brother. Their relationship stayed remarkably free of the ego clashes that often destroyed Hollywood partnerships. One reason was respect. Newman admired Redford's careful approach to acting, how he studied scripts and thought about every choice. Redford admired Newman's boldness, his willingness to throw himself into roles without overthinking. That balance gave their work an energy that felt alive on screen, and their friendship mirrored that same push and pull. By the early 1970s, Hollywood insiders knew that the Redford-Newman connection wasn't just a stunt pairing, it was a real bond, the kind of friendship that made long shoots easier and fame less isolating. Their next project together would prove just how strong that bond had become. The Sting shatters records. After Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, studios wanted another pairing of Paul Newman and Robert Redford. It didn't take long. In 1973, director George Roy Hill reunited the two men for The Sting, a film set in the 1930s about grifters running an elaborate con. The project looked promising on paper, but no one expected just how big it would become. Casting was again key. Newman played veteran conman Henry Gondorff, while Redford took on the younger hustler Johnny Hooker. The script gave Newman the chance to play seasoned and sly, with Redford as the eager apprentice. Their banter and timing carried the film. Even critics who disliked caper movies admitted the chemistry was impossible to ignore. Behind the scenes, the working style they had built on Butch Cassidy returned. Newman improvised lines. Redford, as before, played off them with restraint and precision. Director Hill let them bounce ideas freely, trusting that the natural rhythm would elevate the story. The release in December 1973 was a cultural event. Audiences filled theaters across the United States. The film grossed more than $150 million worldwide, a staggering figure for its time. More than money, the movie swept award season. The Sting won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Redford received his first Oscar nomination for Best Actor. Newman, though not nominated that year, saw his reputation grow even further. What stood out to critics was the dynamic between the two stars. They weren't competing for the spotlight. Instead, they balanced each other. Newman's mischievous energy and Redford's cool focus created a partnership that felt effortless. Reviewers compared them to classic Hollywood duos, noting how rare it was for two leading men to share the screen without ego battles. The success of The Sting locked them in as one of Hollywood's most bankable pairings. Studios pushed for more collaborations, but both actors resisted being typecast. Still, the impact was undeniable. Newman and Redford had delivered back-to-back hits that not only made money, but defined an era of American film. Rivalry without resentment. By the mid-1970s, Paul Newman and Robert Redford were two of the biggest names in Hollywood. With that kind of fame came comparisons. The press loved to pit them against each other, calling one the heartthrob and the other the thinking man's actor. Magazine covers featured side-by-side photos, asking who was the bigger star. The competition wasn't only imagined. Newman was nominated for multiple Academy Awards throughout the 1960s and 1970s, while Redford's career soared with hits like The Candidate in 1972 and All the President's Men in 1976. Audiences debated who gave stronger performances, who drew more box office, and who looked better doing it. The rivalry narrative practically wrote itself. Yet behind the scenes, there was no bitterness. Both men joked about the constant comparisons. Newman, known for his dry humor, once quipped that he wished he had Redford's looks. Redford responded by saying he wished he had Newman's confidence. Those comments showed they saw the rivalry as entertainment, not something to take seriously. Their private competitiveness came out in different ways. Newman had his race cars, he drove in professional events, and built a reputation as a serious competitor. Redford wasn't drawn to racing, but loved skiing and outdoor challenges. When they spent time together, the spirit of one-upmanship stayed playful. Friends said their teasing kept them sharp but never crossed into real tension. The industry tried to capitalize on the supposed clash. Studios pushed for another film pairing to cash in on the Newman versus Redford story, but both resisted being boxed in. They didn't want to be seen as a package duo, and they turned down scripts that felt too forced. This restraint only fueled the media's hunger for speculation, but the two actors stayed focused on their own paths. By the end of the decade, it was clear the battle between them was mostly a media invention. Both men had carved out their own territory, thriving without stepping on each other's toes. Private lives. Public distance. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Paul Newman and Robert Redford stayed close friends, but their professional paths began to separate. Both men built personal lives that kept them outside the Hollywood spotlight, and that meant less time working together on screen. Newman focused heavily on family. Married to actress Joanne Woodward since 1958, he often credited her with keeping him grounded. They raised 3 daughters together while balancing acting careers. Away from film sets, Newman threw himself into auto racing, a passion that grew into professional-level competition. He also launched Newman's Own in 1982, a food company that donated all profits to charity. By the mid-1980s, the brand had already given millions to good causes, showing how much philanthropy had become central to his life. Redford was moving in different directions. He had married Lola Van Wagenen in 1958, and together they raised 4 children, though tragedy struck early when their first son died in infancy. As the years went on, Redford became deeply interested in directing. In 1980, he released Ordinary People, a quiet drama that surprised Hollywood by winning the Academy Award for Best Picture. Redford himself won the Oscar for Best Director. That achievement placed him not just in front of the camera, but firmly behind it. During this same period, Redford also began carving out a space for independent film. In 1981, he founded the Sundance Institute, which soon grew into the Sundance Film Festival. The event gave young filmmakers a stage and changed the landscape of American cinema. While Newman was building a charitable empire with salad dressing and philanthropy, Redford was building an artistic empire that supported new voices in film. Because of these different focuses, their on-screen collaborations ended after the sting. Fans kept hoping for a third pairing, but the timing never worked. They respected each other's commitments and stayed in touch privately, even as Hollywood kept asking why they didn't reunite. By the mid-1980s, the two men were often photographed together at events, but they were no longer sharing film sets. They had grown into distinct public figures: Newman, the racing driver and philanthropist, and Redford, the actor-director shaping independent cinema. The distance wasn't a break in their friendship, it was the natural result of two lives moving in different but equally demanding directions. Sundance and Newman support. By the 1980s, Robert Redford was no longer just an actor. With the Sundance Institute, he had created a home for young filmmakers who couldn't break into Hollywood through traditional studios. The Institute began workshops, then screenings, and by 1985 the Sundance Film Festival had taken shape in Utah. What started as a regional event quickly gained international attention. Paul Newman noticed he had always admired Redford's interest in stories outside the mainstream, and the two men spoke about the importance of giving new talent a chance. While Newman wasn't formally part of Sundance, he quietly supported the mission. His own reputation for generosity matched the values Redford was building into the festival. The friendship between them showed up in gestures, not press releases. Newman offered advice, contacts, and encouragement. He was also one of the few stars of his caliber who didn't dismiss independent film as a passing fad. By standing behind Redford's vision, Newman added credibility to Sundance in its early years. Industry insiders respected Newman's judgment, and his approval helped attract attention that smaller filmmakers needed. Both men were using their success to give back, though in different ways. Newman's own had already donated millions by the late 1980s. Redford Sundance was reshaping the film world by launching careers of directors who would later become household names. Together, even without sharing the screen, they showed how Hollywood power could be turned towards something larger than personal fame. There were times Newman attended Sundance events, not as a star guest, but as a friend. Photographs from the period capture the two men smiling side by side, still trading jokes. For fans, those moments confirm that the partnership built during Butch Cassidy and The Sting was still alive, even if not in theaters. By the early 1990s, Sundance had become the premier showcase for independent cinema, and Newman remained a vocal admirer of what Redford had built. Both actors had carved out new roles, Newman as the philanthropist, businessman, Redford as the patron of indie film. Their paths were still different, but the respect between them never wavered. Newman's final years. News of Paul Newman's illness surfaced quietly. In 2007, reports began circulating that he was battling cancer. At first, Newman denied the claims, insisting he was fine. But as months went on, his appearance told another story. He grew thinner, and by 2008, it was confirmed that he had lung cancer. Through those final years, Newman kept much of his struggle private. He continued focusing on his foundation and his children's camps, which provided free programs for sick kids. Even while sick, he made sure that charity work ran smoothly. Friends said he never lost his sharp sense of humor, even during treatment. Robert Redford, true to their friendship, stayed quiet in public. He didn't speak to reporters or offer sound bites about Newman's condition. When asked, he would change the subject or keep his answers short. Insiders said Redford was deeply affected but wanted to protect Newman's privacy. The two men did see each other, though rarely in public settings. Their last conversations remained private, but close friends confirmed that Redford checked in and offered support during those final months. Newman was known for his independence, and Redford respected that. He let Newman set the terms for how much contact there would be. On the 26th of September, 2008, Newman passed away at his home in Westport, Connecticut. He was 83 years old. The news made global headlines. Tributes poured in from fellow actors, directors, and political leaders. His charitable legacy was mentioned as much as his film career. Redford, however, chose not to make a long statement at the time. He stayed silent, letting the family grieve without distraction. Years of silence after Newman. When Paul Newman passed away, tributes poured in immediately. Fellow actors, political leaders, and even U.S. presidents released statements. News outlets highlighted his legacy as an actor, philanthropist, and cultural icon. The coverage was massive and emotional, but one voice was notably missing: Robert Redford. Redford had every reason to speak. For the public, he was Newman's greatest screen partner. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Sting had forever tied their names together. Reporters expected a heartfelt statement. Instead, Redford chose silence. At the time, he issued only a short comment, saying he had lost a great friend and that words were hard to find. Then he retreated. The restraint became part of the story. Newspapers pointed out the contrast between Redford's brief words and the long tributes offered by others. Fans noticed too, questioning why the man closest to Newman on screen had stayed so guarded. Some speculated he was overwhelmed by grief. Others suggested it reflected his lifelong discomfort with public displays of emotion. In the years that followed, Redford rarely mentioned Newman at all. Interviews promoting his own films often included questions about Newman, but he dodged them. If pressed, he would pivot back to his projects or give vague, polite answers. The avoidance was deliberate. Friends close to him said Redford wanted to protect Newman's privacy even in death, refusing to turn their friendship into a public spectacle. That silence lasted nearly a decade. During that time, Newman's legacy continued to grow. His food brand donated hundreds of millions to charity. Documentaries about his life kept his memory alive. Anniversary screenings of Butch Cassidy and The Sting reminded audiences of their chemistry. Through it all, Redford kept his public distance. The absence of his voice added weight to the eventual moment when he did choose to speak. By holding back for so long, Redford built tension around his eventual words. It wasn't a case of forgetting or indifference. It was a deliberate choice to wait until he was ready. Redford finally speaks. For nearly a decade after Paul Newman's death, Robert Redford avoided the subject. That changed when he reached 89. He finally allowed himself to speak openly about the man who had defined so much of his career. The words were simple, not long speeches. Redford called Newman like a brother. He explained that Newman had a gift for making everyone around him better, whether in front of a camera or in daily life. Coming from someone known for his reserve, the statement carried unusual weight. Redford recalled their unspoken rhythm on set. He said they didn't need long conversations about scenes. Instead, they trusted instinct, and that trust made the work easier. That remark shed light on why their films felt effortless even decades later. Audiences weren't just watching two actors. They were watching a partnership built on confidence and respect. He also spoke briefly about the humor. Newman's quick wit kept sets loose, while Redford's restraint balanced the energy. He admitted those moments helped them push through long shoots. By highlighting laughter alongside respect, Redford painted a picture of a friendship with many layers, not just professional admiration. The decision to speak at 89 was striking. For years, Redford had stayed silent, letting Newman's family and foundation define the public memory. His eventual comments weren't rehearsed tributes or prepared eulogies. They were plain words, shared late in life when reflection carried more gravity. Fans and critics quickly seized on those remarks. Newspapers quoted his line about brotherhood. Film historians noted how rare it was for Redford to show such vulnerability. For many, it provided closure. It confirmed that what audiences had seen on screen, the banter, the ease, the warmth, wasn't just performance. It was real. Redford didn't add more. He didn't expand into long reflections or essays. He kept his comments short, as if he wanted them to stand without decoration. That restraint made the words hit harder. They were not about legacy or analysis. They were about friendship. At 89, Redford finally spoke up. With just a few sentences, he gave the world a glimpse of what Paul Newman had meant to him and why that bond had endured long after the cameras stopped rolling. She knew Howard Hughes before the crash helmet, had a front-row seat to Jeff Chandler's secrets, and Rock Hudson, Mamie Van Doren says she saw the truth behind the tux. Now, she's naming names and she's not sugarcoating a thing. Early Hollywood ambitions. Joan Lucille Olander was just 9 when her family moved from South Dakota to Los Angeles in 1942. It didn't take long for her to dream bigger than school plays. She watched Jean Harlow movies, saw the buzz around Lana Turner's soda fountain discovery, and decided she wanted that life too. By her teens, Joan had bleached her hair platinum and practiced her walk in front of the mirror. She wasn't waiting around to be discovered. She entered beauty contests instead. In 1949, at just 16, she won Miss 8-Ball and Miss Palm Springs. The titles weren't huge, but the exposure was. One of her prizes, a screen test at RKO Studios. That's where Howard Hughes took notice. Hughes, already deep in the Hollywood scene, invited her for a meeting. She showed up, confident and blunt. At one point, he asked if she was a virgin. She fired back, "You'll never know, Mr. Hughes." That line stuck. Hughes reportedly laughed, impressed. That single comeback, part sass, part self-defense, landed her a contract at RKO. Joan was underage, untrained, and mostly uncredited at first, but she had presence. She appeared in background roles in films like His Kind of Woman and 2 Tickets to Broadway. She studied actresses like Harlow and Monroe, but she wasn't trying to be either. She wanted to be sharper, bolder, less sweet. By the end of the decade, Joan had more on her resume than most girls her age. She also had industry attention and a reputation for speaking her mind. In a town that liked quiet girls who smiled on cue, she made it clear she had her own plans. That attitude would take her far, but it also set her apart from the other starlets Universal was grooming. She wasn't just pretty, she was sharp. And in the next chapter, she'd get a new name, a new studio, and a very specific mission: become Universal's answer to Marilyn Monroe. Universal signs Mamie. On the 20th of January 1953, the same day Dwight D. Eisenhower was sworn in as president, Universal Studios gave Joan Lucille Olander a new identity. They signed her to a contract and gave her a name that sounded like a headline: Mamie Van Doren. Mamie came from the First Lady, Mamie Eisenhower. Van Doren was borrowed from the intellectual Van Doren family to make her sound classy. Universal didn't want a fresh face. They wanted a weapon. Marilyn Monroe had just exploded at Fox. Columbia had Kim Novak. Mamie was their counterpunch. The studio bleached her hair again, upped her makeup, and told her to be sexier, funnier, and louder. Mamie didn't object. She wanted to work, and she wasn't interested in being subtle. She started with small roles. In Forbidden, 1953, she had a bit part. In The All-American, 1953, she got more attention. She played the seductive Code next to Tony Curtis, showing she could do more than just stand around looking pretty. Mamie took acting classes between shoots and trained with coaches, trying to prove she had more going on than just her looks. Behind the scenes, Universal pushed her into the spotlight. They staged publicity photos, lined up press interviews, and crafted stories to make her sound like a playful blonde bombshell with brains. Mamie played along but added her own twist. She didn't flirt softly or play dumb. She made bold jokes, called out bad behavior, and didn't wait to be asked for her opinion. She knew the Monroe comparison would follow her everywhere, but she wasn't trying to be a clone. Monroe was soft. Mamie was sharper. She called herself a female James Dean. That kind of line didn't sit well with some in the studio, but it stuck. By the end of 1953, Mamie Van Doren wasn't just a name on a contract. She was a rising brand, and Universal had big plans. They wanted her at premieres and gossip columns, and most importantly, in front of the camera. She was about to get her first big red carpet test. Universal set her up on a public date with one of their biggest stars, someone with secrets the studio didn't want out. Rock Hudson date. In February 1953, Mamie Van Doren got her first real taste of Hollywood spin. Universal paired her with Rock Hudson for the 10th Golden Globe Awards on the 26th of February. It wasn't about romance, but a photo op. The studio wanted buzz, and Rock was one of their most bankable stars. Mamie was excited. She knew who he was: tall, handsome, rising fast. What she didn't know, at least not officially, was the gossip swirling behind the scenes. In the 1950s, being openly gay in Hollywood could destroy a career, so Rock played the game. He went on arranged dates, he smiled for the cameras, and Mamie was the perfect blonde to match him. The night went smoothly. They posed together, waved to fans, and did everything the studio expected. But Mamie says that when he dropped her off, he tried to push the script further. He asked to come in for coffee. She agreed. He made a move, started fumbling with her crinoline dress. She says it was awkward, even a little funny. Nothing happened. Years later, Mamie didn't hold back when she retold the story. She insisted Rock wasn't bisexual. "He tried," she said, "but it wasn't there. Not even close." In her eyes, the whole date was for show. She didn't mind. She'd played along, gotten the exposure, and kept her boundaries. To be clear, Rock Hudson never publicly confirmed his sexuality during his lifetime. He maintained the studio-manufactured image for decades. But Mamie wasn't the only one who saw through it early on. Industry insiders whispered, reporters speculated, but no one dared print it. That night didn't hurt her career. If anything, it made her seem more in demand. She looked like the kind of girl who dated big stars, and she played the part well. But off-camera, Mamie was already breaking rules, speaking freely, keeping her own pace, and refusing to pretend something happened when it didn't. Pattern would define her entire career. Howard Hughes affair. Mamie's first real brush with Hollywood power wasn't a studio head or a famous actor. It was Howard Hughes. She met him in 1949 during her early RKO days, right after winning Miss Palm Springs. He was older, rich, and deeply connected in the film world. She was 16 and ambitious. They started an on-and-off affair that lasted several years. Hughes was known for chasing young actresses, and Mamie fit the type, but she wasn't naive. She said he never made her feel forced. In fact, she set rules from the start. One night, before things got physical, she told him they'd have to use protection. Hughes didn't flinch. He already had a supply waiting. "He came prepared," she later joked. Mamie admitted she made the decision consciously. Her idol, Jean Harlow, had also been linked to Hughes. Following in Harlow's footsteps felt like stepping into Hollywood history. She didn't see it as giving in. She saw it as a power move. Even after she married her first husband, Jack Newman, in 1950, she kept seeing Hughes. She said the marriage was short and mostly a mistake. Newman was a band leader, but their relationship didn't last the year. Hughes, however, kept reappearing. He didn't offer roles or deals, just dinners, conversation, and the occasional getaway. Mamie never painted him as a monster. She called him complicated, smart, and sometimes strange. He'd fly her places without warning or show up late at night with a car. He liked control, but he also respected her edge. She pushed back when others didn't, and Hughes liked the challenge. Their affair fizzled out quietly. There was no big fight, no scandal in the press. It was just another chapter in both their lives, one that Mamie looked back on with curiosity more than regret. In a town filled with whispered affairs and hidden truths, hers stood out because she never tried to hide it. She told the story herself, direct, witty, no shame. It wasn't love, she said, it was Hollywood, and she knew exactly what she was doing. Yankee Pasha romances. By 1954, Mamie Van Doren had her first major studio role in Yankee Pasha, a Technicolor adventure film shot on Universal's lot. The movie itself was forgettable. The behind-the-scenes action? Not so much. Mamie had just come off her stint with Howard Hughes and was single again. During Yankee Pasha, she jumped into two separate flings. One with the film's director, Joe Pevney, and another with her co-star, Jeff Chandler. Both men were older, established, and clearly interested. Mamie wasn't coy. She went for what she wanted. She later wrote in her autobiography, Playing the Field, that Chandler was sweet but distant. Their time together didn't last long, but he left an impression. She had more to say about Pevney, who directed several big-name films and had a habit of mixing business with pleasure. Mamie didn't mind. She was learning how to work the system while staying in control of it. Jack Palance also made a brief appearance in her life around this time. She described their encounter as fast and fiery. It didn't turn into anything serious, but it added to her growing reputation. People started whispering. Mamie didn't care. If the studios wanted to label her a seductress, she wasn't going to argue. She leaned into it. Unlike the other blondes of the era who tried to play innocent, Mamie refused to fake it. She flirted on her own terms. She picked her partners. She made no apologies. Her relationships weren't about climbing ladders, they were about curiosity, confidence, and chemistry. While Yankee Pasha pushed her further into the spotlight, it was her off-screen reputation that made her famous. She wasn't a studio puppet, she was wild, outspoken, and impossible to control. That scared some people, but it thrilled the press. Tabloids started printing stories about her love life, and Mamie didn't deny a thing. She figured honesty was more powerful than scandal. By the end of 1954, she had wrapped one movie, juggled 3 lovers, and kept full control of her public image. No handlers, no fake engagement rings. Just Mamie, calling her own shots and preparing for a whirlwind marriage that would shake things up even more. Bandleader Ray Anthony. In 1955, Mamie Van Doren did something even her fans didn't expect. She got married again, this time to Ray Anthony, a big band leader and close friend of Frank Sinatra. He was older, successful, and had the kind of Hollywood connections most actresses would kill for. Their wedding made headlines. It looked like a real fairy tale. For a while, it felt like one. They lived in a stylish home in Beverly Hills, threw dinner parties, and showed up arm in arm at clubs. Paparazzi followed them constantly. Mamie called it heaven on earth, and for a moment, she meant it. In 1956, they had a son, her only child. She said motherhood changed her, but not in the way the studio hoped. She didn't suddenly want to retire or stay home. She still loved the spotlight, and she wasn't about to give it up just because she had a baby. Ray Anthony didn't love that, neither did the people around him. Friends warned him about marrying a sex symbol. The press labeled her wild, but Mamie didn't pretend to be something she wasn't. She still went to auditions, did photo shoots, and made appearances that raised eyebrows. Despite the glitz, the marriage started to crack early. Mamie said they were too different. Ray wanted a wife who stayed quiet and looked perfect. Mamie wanted a partner who respected her fire. She claimed she never cheated on him or on any of her husbands, but the gossip columns said otherwise. She ignored them. By 1961, the marriage was over. Their divorce wasn't messy in public, but Mamie was done playing the traditional wife. She kept custody of her son and kept working. Ray moved on. So did she. What stuck was the way she handled it. No dramatic interviews and sob stories. Only a few sharp lines in later interviews. It stopped working, so I stopped pretending. Rock and roll films. She wasn't waiting around for dramatic roles or serious scripts. She leaned straight into the era's wildest trend, rock and roll. Studios didn't quite know how to handle the music craze, but they knew Mamie fit the vibe: rebellious, sexy, loud, and fearless. Untamed Youth came first. She starred opposite rockabilly icon Eddie Cochran, playing a jailed farm worker who sings her way through teenage rebellion. The movie was low budget and barely reviewed by critics, but it became a cult hit. Cochran's on-screen charm and Mamie's bold attitude created something new, a crossover between music and movie stardom that hadn't really existed yet. Next came High School Confidential. In 1958, Mamie played a sultry teacher in a high school crawling with undercover agents and teen drug dealers. Jerry Lee Lewis performed the opening number on the back of a flatbed truck. The plot was nonsense, but the energy was off the charts. Kids packed the theaters. Adults were horrified. Mamie knew exactly what she was doing. She played it up, camp and all. By 1960, she starred in Sex Kittens Go to College with singer Conway Twitty. The title alone made headlines. The movie was pure fluff, but it kept her in the spotlight. Mamie had carved out a new niche. She wasn't Monroe's fragile dream girl or Novak's cool mystery. She was the brassy blonde who embraced the chaos, strutted through B-movies, and brought rock and roll to the big screen. Off-camera, Mamie kept her image loud and wild. She wore tight dresses, said whatever she wanted in interviews, and ignored studio warnings to tone it down. She wasn't trying to impress critics. She wanted fans. And she got them. Teenagers saw her as fun and fearless. Parents saw her as trouble. Studios didn't know what to do with her long term, but They kept casting her in roles that matched the times: rebellious, sexy, and just a little dangerous. Mamie wasn't trying to win Oscars. She was building a legend on her terms. No scripts softened her, no directors tamed her, and no era suited her better than rock and roll. Vietnam War tours. The war was raging, but Mamie Van Doren didn't stay home. When the opportunity came to perform for U.S. troops in Vietnam, she didn't hesitate. She joined the USO tour circuit, flying straight into danger zones to entertain soldiers who were exhausted, wounded, or just trying to survive the week. Conditions were rough. She flew in a helicopter that got shelled midair. She wore a helmet on stage more than once, but she kept going. While most celebrity performers stuck to base shows and retreated fast, Mamie went further. She visited hospitals. She held hands. She posed for photos with soldiers who could barely sit up. She also noticed who wasn't doing the same. Bob Hope was famous for his USO tours, but Mamie later said he performed safely during the day, then flew out to Thailand by night. She didn't name names to start a feud, but she made it clear she stayed longer, went deeper, and took real risks. "I didn't do it for press," she said later. "I did it because they needed it." The experience changed her. Mamie had always been politically neutral in public, but seeing the war up close broke that. She started questioning why they were there, how POWs were being treated, and what the government wasn't saying. After visiting soldiers who had barely survived capture, her view shifted. The Eisenhower-era conservative was gone. Mamie became a vocal critic of the war, especially after seeing the aftermath in Hanoi. She didn't spin it into a career move. There were no photo spreads, no new records, no television specials to cash in. What stayed with her was the look in those soldiers' eyes and the sound of gunfire during a show. She'd spent years playing sexy and funny in front of cameras. Vietnam was different. It was real. That version of Mamie, tough, grounded, still glamorous, but visibly shaken, didn't fit Hollywood's image machine. But she didn't care. She'd done the thing no one expected. She stepped off the soundstage and into a war zone, and came back with stories no press agent could have written. Burt Reynolds' affair. Hollywood kept changing, but Mamie Van Doren wasn't going anywhere. By 1972, she was in her 40s and still turning heads. That's when Burt Reynolds walked into the picture. He was just starting to break into stardom, charming, cocky, and known for his shirtless magazine spreads. Mamie liked confidence. They hit it off fast. Their affair didn't last long, but it left a mark. Mamie later said Burt was funny and smooth, but not built for anything serious. She wasn't looking for a deep connection either. It was brief, playful, and exactly what it looked like. Two good-looking stars, both on their own paths, meeting in the middle for a few weeks of fun. That same year, Mamie married again, this time to Ross McClintock, a businessman from the Fluor Corporation. He wasn't famous, and their relationship moved fast, too fast. She admitted later she never actually loved him. The marriage was annulled in 1973. It was clear she was trying something different. After a career built on image and chaos, maybe she thought a quiet marriage with a regular guy would work. It didn't. She said McClintock was a good man, but not her match. She needed energy, curiosity, something sharp. And he wasn't it. Throughout all of this, Mamie kept working. She appeared in B-movies, did stage shows, and maintained her public presence. But she wasn't chasing fame the same way. She seemed more selective, more amused by the machine she'd once fought so hard to be part of. What made this era different was how open she became. She started giving interviews with more bite, telling stories that publicists would have once buried. The Reynolds fling? She owned it. The short marriage? She laughed about it. She wasn't trying to spin anything. By the time the McClintock chapter closed, Mamie had 5 marriages behind her and a reputation for telling the truth, whether people liked it or not. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't desperate to settle down. She just kept moving, always in control of her own story. Lasting marriage, revelations. Mamie Van Doren finally slowed down, for real this time, in 1979. That's when she married Thomas Dixon, a businessman far removed from the Hollywood chaos. He wasn't rich, famous, or chasing headlines, but he stuck around. The marriage lasted decades through the fading of the studio system, the rise of reality television, and Mamie outliving nearly every peer from her era. She stayed out of scandals, but she didn't disappear. In interviews, she kept speaking her mind. Her autobiography, Playing the Field, gave blunt details about everyone from Rock Hudson to Howard Hughes. And in her 90s, she wasn't done. In a 2025 IndieWire interview, Mamie revisited the Rock Hudson story, the one that started back in 1953. She stuck to it. "He tried," she said again, "but it just wasn't there." She still believed Hudson was gay, not bisexual, and that their awkward post-Golden Globes encounter proved it. Not everyone agreed, but Mamie didn't care. She wasn't trying to rewrite history. She was determined to tell it her way. In 2025, at 94, she executive produced a documentary, Mamie Exposed: The Life and Loves of the Last Blonde Bombshell. It won't be a comeback, it will be a revelation. The documentary won't just rehash her film career, it will dig into her essence, why she always speaks her mind, why she turned her back on major studios, why she embraces a life less ordinary. Mamie seeks neither pity nor nostalgia. She will demand truth. By 93, Mamie Van Doren wasn't a forgotten bombshell. She was a living archive of glam, gossip, war zones, bad marriages, and Hollywood fakery. And she told it all with a wink. The man nobody wanted. Lee Van Cleef spent 15 years in Hollywood getting punched in the face by bigger stars. That's not a metaphor. He literally got beat up on screen for a living. While John Wayne was making $750,000 per picture, Van Cleef was lucky to get $350 for a week's work playing another nameless gunslinger who'd die before the third act. The numbers were brutal. Between 1952 and 1965, Van Cleef appeared in over 90 productions. He died on screen in most of them. Shot, stabbed, hanged, thrown off cliffs. Meanwhile, Wayne never died. Not once in that same period. Wayne was the hero. Van Cleef was target practice. Van Cleef's face didn't help. Those hawk-like features, the sharp nose that had been broken in a car accident, eyes that studio executives called sinister. One casting director told him flat out, "You'll never be a leading man with that face." Wayne, on the other hand, had the all-American look. Square jaw, easy smile. The face that sold war bonds. The rejection letters piled up. Van Cleef kept them in a drawer. Each one said the same thing in different words. Too menacing, too ethnic-looking, not heroic enough. One producer actually wrote, "He looks like he'd rob his own mother." This while Wayne was getting scripts delivered to his house by studio messengers. Van Cleef was painting houses to pay rent in 1964. A decorated World War II veteran who'd served on a minesweeper, he was spreading primer on suburban walls while Wayne played war heroes without ever serving in combat. The irony burned. Wayne's perfect system. John Wayne didn't just dominate westerns, he controlled them. By 1960, Wayne had approval over scripts, directors, and casting for most of his films. He had a system. A very specific system, and that system had no room for actors like Lee Van Cleef. Wayne's westerns followed rules. The hero stands tall. The villain is clearly marked. Good conquers evil. America always wins. Wayne personally vetoed any script that challenged these rules. He turned down roles where his character showed weakness. He refused parts where the hero questioned authority. He wouldn't work with directors who wanted moral ambiguity. Van Cleef represented everything Wayne's system rejected. Those sharp features suggested complexity. That lean frame spoke of hunger, not heroism. When Van Cleef appeared on screen, even as a villain, he brought questions. Why did this man turn bad? What drove him here? Wayne didn't want questions. He wanted answers. Simple one. The production notes from Wayne's films reveal the control. On the Alamo, Wayne personally selected every supporting actor. Not one had features that might upstage him. On The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Wayne insisted his character be portrayed as noble even in defeat. The director complied. Wayne's name sold tickets. Van Cleef auditioned for 5 Wayne productions between 1959 and 1963. Rejected every time. The casting notes, when they survived, were telling, "Too intense. Might confuse audience sympathy. Face too memorable." That last one stung most. In Wayne's world, only one face should be memorable. The political divide. Politics made it worse. Much worse. Wayne was Hollywood's most vocal conservative, president of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, supporter of blacklists, a man who named names during the Red Scare. Van Cleef kept his politics private, but his associations spoke volumes. He worked with blacklisted directors, took roles from producers Wayne publicly condemned. When Wayne was making propaganda films supporting Vietnam, Van Cleef was in Italy making westerns that criticized American imperialism. The spaghetti western movement that saved Van Cleef's career was everything Wayne hated. These films, made by Italian communists and socialists, portrayed the American West as corrupt, violent without purpose, greed without glory. Wayne called them perverted. He said they were destroying the American image. In 1967, Wayne gave an interview to Playboy. He didn't mention Van Cleef by name, but the target was clear. He condemned actors who sold out to foreign productions, men who prostituted themselves for Italian money, men who helped create what Wayne called anti-American propaganda. Van Cleef was in Rome when that interview published, making $25,000 per film. The most money he'd ever seen. He'd gone from painting houses to top billing, from $350 weekly to international stardom, all because he'd done what Wayne considered treason. He'd left Hollywood's controlled system. Wayne's influence reached across the Atlantic. American distributors who relied on Wayne's films hesitated to pick up spaghetti westerns. Theater chains that showed Wayne's movies got pressure to skip the Italian imports. The word was subtle but clear. Choose side. Sergio Leone changed everything. Sergio Leone saw something in Lee Van Cleef that Hollywood refused to see. In 1965, Leone was casting for a few dollars more. He needed someone to match Clint Eastwood. Someone with presence. Someone whose face told stories without words. Leone watched Van Cleef in an old episode of Gunsmoke, 30 seconds of screen time. Van Cleef played a doomed outlaw. But in those 30 seconds, Leone saw what Wayne's Hollywood had missed. He saw nobility in those harsh features, dignity in that lean frame, character in those hooded eyes. The specific scene that caught Leone's attention is worth examining. Van Cleef's character enters a saloon. He knows he's going to die. The marshal is waiting. But Van Cleef doesn't play fear, doesn't play rage. He plays exhaustion, a man tired of running. In American westerns, villains died, snarling or begging. Van Cleef's character just looked relieved. Leone watched that scene 50 times. Frame by frame, he saw an entire film in those 30 seconds. The telegram to Van Cleef was brief. Come to Rome. Immediately. Expenses paid. Van Cleef thought it was a joke. He was installing insulation in someone's attic when his wife brought him the message. He'd been out of serious work for 2 years. His hands were cut from fiberglass. His back ached from crawling through confined spaces. He was 41 years old. Doing work meant for younger men who hadn't spent 20 years learning a craft that no longer wanted them. Van Cleef almost didn't go. The plane ticket would max out their last credit card. If this was a scam, they'd have nothing left. His wife, Joan, made the decision. She pawned her wedding ring. The original one, not the replacement Van Cleef bought when times were good. That had already been sold. She handed him the cash and said, "If you don't go, we'll always wonder." Leone didn't want Van Cleef to play another villain. He wanted him as the co-lead, equal billing with Eastwood, the same Eastwood who'd been fired from a bit part in a Wayne film just years earlier. Two rejects from Wayne's Hollywood about to reinvent the Western. The role was Colonel Mortimer, a bounty hunter with principles. Complex, intelligent, deadly, but honorable. Everything Wayne said a Western hero couldn't be. Mortimer dressed in black. He killed for money. He operated outside the law. Yet audiences loved him. For a few dollars more, made more money in Europe than any Wayne film had in 5 years. Van Cleef became an instant star. Not in America, not yet, but in Italy, Spain, Germany, France. Places where Wayne's simple morality didn't sell anymore. Leone later said something revealing. He chose Van Cleef precisely because Hollywood had rejected him. Those weathered features that American producers called too menacing looked authentic to European eyes. Real cowboys, Leone believed, wouldn't look like John Wayne. They'd look like Lee Van Cleef. The Money Trail. The economics were devastating to Wayne's ego. By 1968, spaghetti westerns were outperforming traditional westerns worldwide. Van Cleef's films, made for under $500,000, earned millions. Wayne's bloated productions, costing 10 times more, struggled to break even. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly earned $25 million worldwide. Wayne's The War Wagon, released the same year, made $6 million. Van Cleef was suddenly bankable in markets Wayne couldn't touch. Asia, South America, Eastern Europe, places where Wayne's American exceptionalism didn't translate. Van Cleef's salary progression tells the story. 1964, painting houses for $3 per hour. 1965, $25,000 for a few dollars more. 1966, $50,000 for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. 1967, $100,000 for Death Rides a Horse. By 1968, he was making $250,000 per film. Still less than Wayne's $750,000, but Van Cleef was making 4 films per year to Wayne's one. The Italian producers had a different model. Fast, cheap, profitable, no union restrictions, no studio oversight, no moral guidelines. They shot in Spain, where labor was cheap. They dubbed everything, so language didn't matter. They sold globally while Wayne sold to America. Van Cleef learned Italian. He embraced the culture. He bought a house in Rome. He wasn't just taking Italian money. He was becoming European. This while Wayne was wrapping himself tighter in the American flag, making films that increasingly felt like museum pieces. American studios noticed. They started offering Van Cleef Hollywood roles again, but now he could refuse them. He did, repeatedly. He turned down parts that would have had him playing subordinate to established stars, parts that looked suspiciously like the thankless villain roles he'd done for 15 years. The Face-to-Face. They crossed paths exactly 3 times after Van Cleef's European success. Each encounter was documented by witnesses. Each was tense. Each revealed more about why these men couldn't coexist in the same industry. The first was at the 1969 Golden Globes. Van Cleef had returned to Los Angeles for business. Wayne was presenting. Backstage, they stood 5 feet apart. Wayne looked through Van Cleef like he was furniture. Van Cleef stared back. Neither spoke. A photographer asked them to pose together. Wayne walked away. Van Cleef smiled. The second was on the Paramount lot in 1971. Van Cleef was discussing an American project. Wayne was filming. They met in the commissary. Wayne was holding court at his regular table. Van Cleef entered. The room went quiet. Wayne said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I guess they'll let anyone in here now." Van Cleef got his coffee and left. The third and final meeting was at a Producers Guild event in 1973. Van Cleef was back in Hollywood, his European career winding down. Wayne was drunk. Witnesses say very drunk. He approached Van Cleef near the bar. "You're the one who sold out," Wayne said. Van Cleef's response was quiet, but a waiter heard it. "I'm the one who survived without kissing your ass." Wayne swung. He was 66 years old and drunk, but he swung. Van Cleef stepped aside. Wayne missed and stumbled. Security intervened. The incident was hushed up. No police report. No press coverage. But everyone there saw it. The king of cowboys throwing a punch at the man who'd escaped his kingdom. What Wayne never knew. Here's what burned Van Cleef most. Wayne never knew the details. Never knew that Van Cleef's daughter was disabled. Never knew the medical bills that drove him to paint houses. Never knew that Van Cleef tried to get union help during his lean years and was told he hadn't earned enough credits. Wayne never knew that Van Cleef was turned down for a loan from the Motion Picture Relief Fund in 1963, the same fund Wayne served on the board of. The rejection letter cited insufficient industry standing. 15 years of work wasn't enough standing. Wayne never knew that Van Cleef's wife nearly left him in 1964. The financial pressure was destroying their marriage. She worked 2 jobs while he chased parts that didn't exist, parts that Wayne's Hollywood wouldn't give him. Van Cleef never talked about this publicly. Even in later interviews, when he could have destroyed Wayne's image, he kept quiet about the personal costs. He'd mention the rejection, the typecasting, the struggle, but never the daughter's therapy bills, never the nights without electricity, never the repo notices. Wayne lived in a bubble of success. His struggles ended in the 1940s. By the time Van Cleef was trying to break through, Wayne had forgotten what failure felt like. He saw Van Cleef's move to Europe as betrayal. He couldn't see it as survival. The class divide was real. Wayne came from middle-class Iowa stock. Van Cleef's family were New Jersey farmers. Wayne went to USC on a football scholarship. Van Cleef joined the Navy at 17. Wayne got his breakthrough connections. Van Cleef got his through desperation. The young gun's disrespect. Even younger actors treated Van Cleef like damaged goods. Robert Redford, riding high after Butch Cassidy, was offered a scene with Van Cleef in a 1970 television movie. Redford's agent called the producers. The message was clear. Redford doesn't work with spaghetti western types. The scene was rewritten. Paul Newman was subtler but equally dismissive. At a Directors Guild screening in 1971, Van Cleef approached Newman about a project. Newman listened politely, then said, "I don't think our styles would mesh." Translation: Van Cleef was beneath him. Newman had never seen a single Van Cleef starring role. Didn't matter. Steve McQueen was the worst of the younger generation. He actively campaigned against Van Cleef getting parts. When Van Cleef was considered for The Magnificent Seven, McQueen told director John Sturges that Van Cleef would bring the wrong energy. He meant European energy, foreign energy. The role went to Robert Vaughn instead. The irony burned. McQueen was doing exactly what Van Cleef had done, playing anti-heroes, complex characters, morally ambiguous men, but McQueen was doing it with Hollywood's blessing and budget. Van Cleef had to cross an ocean to play those same roles. Charles Bronson should have been an ally, another actor with unconventional looks who struggled for years, but when Bronson broke through in the 70s, he distanced himself from Van Cleef. They'd known each other since 1954, shared drinks, shared rejections, but success changed Bronson. He told people he'd earned his stardom the right way, the American way. At a Hollywood party in 1975, Van Cleef confronted Bronson. Witnesses say Van Cleef asked, "What's the right way, Charlie? Kissing ass for 20 years?" Bronson walked away. They never spoke again. The final insult. Wayne's last Western was The Shootist in 1976. He played a dying gunfighter. Critics called it his finest performance. The vulnerability he'd avoided for 40 years finally appeared on screen. He was dying in real life, too. Cancer. Van Cleef was offered a role in the film, not a villain this time, a sheriff, a lawman. It would have been a reconciliation of sorts. Van Cleef turned it down. No explanation, just no. The real reason came out years later. The role paid $10,000. Van Cleef was making $300,000 per film in Europe, but it wasn't about money. The producers wanted Van Cleef to thank Wayne publicly for the opportunity, to acknowledge Wayne's greatness. to essentially apologize for choosing Europe over Hollywood. Van Cleef's agent begged him to take it. It would reopen Hollywood doors. It would rehabilitate his American career. It would end the unofficial blacklist that still limited his U.S. opportunities. Van Cleef's response was 2 words: absolutely not. Wayne died in 1979. Van Cleef outlived him by 10 years. In those 10 years, Van Cleef gave exactly 1 interview about Wayne. An Italian journalist asked about their relationship. Van Cleef's answer: John Wayne represented everything I had to escape to survive. He was the lock. I had to find another door. At Wayne's funeral, every major Hollywood figure attended. Van Cleef wasn't invited. He was in Spain filming another Western. When told about Wayne's death, witnesses say Van Cleef nodded and went back to work. The System's Revenge. After Wayne died, something interesting happened, or didn't happen. Van Cleef's American career never recovered. The blacklist Wayne never officially declared somehow continued. Van Cleef couldn't get major U.S. theatrical releases. His films went straight to drive-ins or television. The Hollywood establishment closed ranks. Directors who'd worked with Wayne wouldn't hire Van Cleef. Studios that had produced Wayne's films ignored Van Cleef's agents. The message was never explicit. It didn't have to be. Van Cleef made his living doing television. The Master with Timothy Van Patten. Guest spots on The A-Team. He was 60 years old, taking whatever paid. The man who'd been Europe's biggest Western star was doing episodes of Airwolf. But here's the detail that matters. Van Cleef never complained publicly, never wrote a tell-all book, never sold his story to tabloids. He could have made money trashing Wayne's memory. He didn't. Instead, he kept working. B-movies, television, voice work, whatever paid bills. He bought a modest house in Oxnard, California. No mansion, no Hollywood Hills estate. Just a regular house in a working-class neighborhood. When young actors asked about his career, Van Cleef told them about Europe, about Leone, about breaking free from Hollywood's boxes. He never mentioned Wayne by name. But the lesson was clear. Sometimes you have to leave to succeed. Van Cleef died in 1989. Heart attack. He was still working, scheduled to film another low-budget Western. His funeral was small, family and a few actor friends. No Hollywood establishment, no studio executives, no Academy tribute. What the papers missed. The obituaries got it wrong. They called Van Cleef a character actor who found fame in spaghetti westerns. They mentioned his work with Leone. They noted his villain roles. They missed the real story. Van Cleef wasn't just another actor who went to Europe. He was proof that Wayne's Hollywood was a lie, that the meritocracy was actually an aristocracy. That talent meant less than fitting the mold. The European directors who worked with Van Cleef told different stories. They talked about his professionalism, his willingness to do his own stunts at 50, his ability to convey volumes with just his eyes, things Hollywood never let him show. Leone's assistant director on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly said something revealing. Van Cleef never mentioned Wayne on set. But whenever they filmed scenes where Van Cleef's character faced off against authority, something changed in his eyes, a real anger. Decades of rejection focused into a look. Van Cleef's daughter gave one interview after his death. She said her father kept a photo in his wallet, not a family photo, not a publicity still. It was a picture from For a Few Dollars More, his first starring role, his escape from Wayne's Hollywood. She said he looked at it every day. The final irony came in 2003. The American Film Institute listed its top 50 heroes and villains. Wayne was number 13 on the heroes list. Van Cleef didn't make either list. Even in death, he remained outside their system. But in Rome, there's a bar near Cinecittà Studios. Van Cleef's picture hangs on the wall, not Wayne's Van Cleef's. The bartender, whose father worked on spaghetti westerns, says American tourists sometimes ask who at Island. He tells them, the man who showed us John Wayne was just an actor. This man was real. They made us laugh. They made us cry. They made us believe in their on-screen personas. But when the cameras stopped rolling, their true nature came out, and it's nothing like what you expected. The Family Man's Dark Side. For years, Bill Cosby was America's favorite TV dad. On The Cosby Show, he played the perfect father, funny, wise, and full of life lessons. Off-screen, he gave speeches about family values and personal responsibility. But behind the friendly image, there was a much darker truth. For decades, rumors followed him, but few questioned his reputation. That changed in 2014 when comedian Hannibal Buress called him out during a stand-up show. The clip went viral, and suddenly, the world started listening. One by one, women came forward, sharing nearly identical stories. More than 60 women accused Cosby of drugging and assaulting them. Many had been too scared to speak out earlier. He was rich, powerful, and had a spotless public image, but the details were disturbing. Aspiring actresses, models, and even colleagues said he lured them in with promises of mentorship, only to betray them. In 2015, Cosby was arrested for assaulting Andrea Constand, a former Temple University employee. The case went to trial, and in 2018, he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, becoming the first major celebrity of the Me Too era to be convicted. But in 2021, his conviction was overturned due to a legal technicality. A past deal with a prosecutor should have prevented the trial from happening. Just like that, Cosby walked free. Even though he was legally released, his career was finished. TV networks pulled The Cosby Show. Schools took back honorary degrees, and fans turned away. The man who once lectured others about morality had been exposed as a predator. He still denies the accusations, but his reputation is beyond repair. The talk show tyrant. For years, Ellen DeGeneres was the face of kindness. Her talk show made millions smile with heartwarming surprises, funny celebrity interviews, and feel-good moments. She ended every episode with the words, "Be kind to one another." But behind the scenes, former staff said kindness was the last thing they experienced. In 2020, reports surfaced that working on The Ellen DeGeneres Show was a nightmare. Employees described a toxic workplace filled with fear, intimidation, and unfair treatment. Some were fired after taking medical leave or attending family funerals. Others were told not to look Ellen in the eye. There were even accusations of harassment by top producers, which led to multiple firings. At first, Ellen brushed off the backlash, claiming she had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. But more and more people spoke out. Former guests revealed cold, awkward interactions that clashed with Ellen's on-screen warmth. Celebrities like Dakota Johnson, Mariah Carey, and Brad Garrett hinted that Ellen's friendly TV persona was just an act. The damage was done. Ratings dropped fast, and advertisers started pulling away. In 2021, Ellen announced that her show would end after 19 seasons. She called it a personal decision, but many saw it as a direct result of the backlash. The comedian who was cruel. Chevy Chase was one of the biggest comedy stars of the 1970s and 80s. As an original Saturday Night Live cast member, he helped shape modern sketch comedy. His success led to major film roles in Caddyshack, National Lampoon's Vacation, and Fletch. On-screen, he played lovable, sarcastic wisecrackers. Off-screen, a different story. From the start of his career, Chase gained a reputation for being difficult. He left SNL after just one season, later returning to host and immediately clashing with the new cast. He insulted everyone, including then-rising star Bill Murray. Their feud got so bad that it turned into a physical fight backstage right before a live episode. His arrogance and mean-spirited humor weren't just aimed at co-stars. Writers, directors, and crew members often found him unbearable. Many claimed he was cruel for no reason, making racist, sexist, and demeaning jokes at others' expense. Will Ferrell once called him the worst SNL host he'd ever worked with. Chase's behavior followed him to film sets. During National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, his co-star Beverly D'Angelo said the entire cast had to adjust to his moods, never knowing if he'd be friendly or hostile that day. On the show Community, his treatment of colleagues reached a breaking point. He frequently insulted cast and crew, directing discriminatory comments toward Donald Glover. Show creator Dan Harmon openly criticized him, and Chase eventually left before the final season. Despite his legacy in comedy, Chase's reputation damaged his career. Once a top box office draw, he became increasingly difficult to work with. By the 2000s, leading roles dried up, and he was mostly remembered for his past work and his bad attitude. In interviews, Chase has admitted to being difficult, but often brushes it off as part of his personality. While some still see him as a comedy icon, others view him as an example of how ego and cruelty can overshadow talent. The philanthropist who lied. Jared Leto built a career on transformation. He's an Oscar-winning actor, a rock star with 30 Seconds to Mars, and a self-proclaimed deep thinker. His fans admire his dedication to roles, extreme method acting, and supposed generosity. But behind the carefully crafted image, Leto has faced serious allegations, ranging from cult-like behavior to inappropriate relationships with young fans. For years, stories circulated about his treatment of followers. His band, 30 Seconds to Mars, developed an intense fan base with Leto at the center. He launched a so-called exclusive retreat called Camp Mars, where fans paid thousands to attend. The event was marketed as a bonding experience, but many saw it as a money grab. Photos surfaced of Leto in white robes, surrounded by adoring fans, fueling comparisons to a cult. Then came the more troubling accusations. Multiple sources, including music journalists and social media users, have claimed Leto pursued teenage fans. Reports date back to the early 2000s, when he allegedly used his fame to lure underage girls into uncomfortable situations. A former music industry insider once said Leto had a reputation for targeting girls as young as 16. Though no formal charges have been filed, the whispers never stopped. Leto's behavior on film sets hasn't helped his case. He's known for extreme method acting, but some call it outright harassment. On the set of Suicide Squad, where he played the Joker, he allegedly sent disturbing gifts to co-stars, including used condoms and dead animals. Many dismissed it as a publicity stunt, but others saw it as unprofessional and unsettling. Despite the controversy, Hollywood continues to embrace him. He's still landing major roles and fronting luxury ad campaigns. When asked about the allegations, Leto stays silent or deflects. His fan base remains loyal, and his reputation, while damaged, hasn't fully crumbled. The romantic lead's abuse. Johnny Depp was once one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. With his roles in Edward Scissorhands, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he built a reputation as the eccentric yet charming leading man. Fans saw him as misunderstood, artistic, and deeply romantic, but his off-screen relationships told a different story. In 2016, his ex-wife, actress Amber Heard, filed for divorce and accused him of domestic violence. She provided photos of bruises and claimed he had a history of alcohol-fueled rage. Depp denied everything, calling her a liar and an abuser herself. What followed was one of the most public and bitter celebrity legal battles in history. Heard wrote a 2018 op-ed describing herself as a survivor of domestic abuse without naming Depp. He responded by suing her for defamation, claiming she ruined his career. During the trial, shocking details emerged: drug binges, explosive fights, and violent texts where Depp described wanting to harm Heard. However, recordings also revealed Heard admitting to hitting Depp. The case divided the public. Some believed Heard, pointing to photos, testimonies, and court filings. Others sided with Depp, arguing Heard manipulated him and the media. In 2020, Depp lost a lawsuit against a British newspaper that called him a wife-beater, with the judge ruling the allegations were substantially true. Then came the 2022 U.S. trial, broadcast live to millions. This time, Depp won, with the jury ruling that Heard had defamed him, but the trial was less about proving innocence and more about public perception. Depp's fan base rallied behind him, while Heard's reputation collapsed. Despite the legal win, Depp's career took a hit. He lost his Pirates of the Caribbean role and struggled to rebuild his image. While some studios distanced themselves, others welcomed him back, including European filmmakers. The action star's fury. Steven Seagal built his career playing tough, unstoppable heroes. In the 80s and 90s, he was one of Hollywood's biggest action stars, leading films like Under Siege and Above the Law. On screen, he took down villains with ease. Off-screen, though, he had a reputation for being difficult, aggressive, and even dangerous. From the start, Seagal's behavior raised eyebrows. He often bragged about his martial arts skills, but many questioned his legitimacy. Co-stars and stunt performers accused him of intentionally hitting them during fight scenes, refusing to pull punches. Actor John Leguizamo recalled Seagal slamming him against a wall for laughing at him on set. His temper wasn't limited to film sets. Over the years, multiple women, including actresses and assistants, accused Seagal of misconduct. Some claimed he made inappropriate advances during auditions, often under the guise of private casting sessions. In 2018, 2 women accused him of assault, including one who said he attacked her when she was just 17. Seagal denied all allegations. His reputation for arrogance and hostility extended beyond Hollywood. Seagal frequently reinvented himself, at one point claiming he worked for the CIA. Later, he cozied up to world leaders, including Vladimir Putin, who granted him Russian citizenship. His growing political ties and controversial statements made him even more polarizing. By the early 2000s, Seagal's Hollywood career was fading. Directors avoided working with him due to his behavior, and he was relegated to low-budget, direct-to-video action films. Even then, reports of mistreatment and erratic behavior continued. Today, Seagal is more known for controversy than for movies. He still insists he's a martial arts master, a law enforcement expert, and a geopolitical strategist. But few take him seriously. Once a major star, his reputation for rage, dishonesty, and misconduct left his career in ruins. The singer who silenced victims. R. Kelly was a music icon. With hits like I Believe I Can Fly and Ignition, Remix, he dominated the R&B charts for decades. Fans saw him as a musical genius, a man who could turn emotions into timeless songs. But behind the fame, troubling accusations followed him for years, ones that were ignored or brushed aside until the truth became too big to hide. Whispers about Kelly's behavior started early in his career. In 1994, at 27, he secretly married 15-year-old Aaliyah using false documents. The marriage was annulled, but it raised serious questions. Then came the early 2000s when disturbing footage surfaced, allegedly showing Kelly involved in misconduct with a minor. He was charged, but avoided conviction in 2008 after the key witness refused to testify. Despite ongoing concerns, Kelly's career thrived. He continued performing to sold-out crowds, winning awards, and working with major artists. Many in the industry turned a blind eye, and those who spoke out were dismissed. For years, he used his wealth and influence to keep accusations quiet. Then, in 2019, Surviving R. Kelly aired. The documentary featured first-hand accounts from multiple women who described years of manipulation and control. The stories painted a disturbing pattern. Kelly allegedly isolated young women, cut them off from their families, and maintained an environment where he controlled every aspect of their lives. The backlash was immediate. His record label dropped him, streaming services pulled his music, and his career collapsed overnight. That same year, Kelly was arrested and charged with serious crimes, including exploitation, coercion, and racketeering. In 2021, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. More convictions followed, sealing his fate. The activist's hidden hypocrisy. Sean Penn built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most intense actors. With 2 Academy Awards and standout performances in Mystic River and Milk, he was celebrated for his raw, emotional performances. Off-screen, he positioned himself as a champion of justice, advocating for disaster relief, human rights, and political reform. But while he spoke passionately about these causes, his personal history painted a far more complicated picture. Penn's reputation for fiery behavior dates back to the 1980s, during his marriage to Madonna. Their relationship was highly publicized, but behind the scenes, it was anything but picture perfect. In 1988, Madonna reportedly sought police assistance after an alleged violent incident. Though she later downplayed parts of the story, reports of Penn's temper followed him for years. His outbursts weren't limited to his personal life. Throughout his career, Penn frequently made headlines for aggressive run-ins with the media. He was known for clashing with paparazzi, sometimes physically, and even served time in 1987 for an altercation with a photographer. In another instance, he was caught on camera aggressively confronting a reporter, showing the same volatility he often criticized in others. Despite his activism, Penn's actions often contradicted his public stance. He supported humanitarian causes but had a history of heated confrontations with colleagues and journalists. His interviews were filled with harsh criticisms of Hollywood, politics, and even his peers, often sounding less like a voice for justice and more like someone settling personal scores. In later years, Penn's unpredictable behavior made him a controversial figure. While some admired his work in disaster relief, others questioned his motivations, seeing him as someone who inserted himself into global crises for attention. His political views also sparked backlash, with some calling him hypocritical for supporting leaders with questionable records. The fan favorite's manipulation. James Corden built a career on charm. As the host of The Late Late Show, he became a fan favorite with viral segments like Carpool Karaoke and Spill Your Guts or Fill Your Guts. His cheerful personality and self-deprecating humor made him seem relatable, an everyman who just happened to be famous. But behind the smiles and sing-alongs, former colleagues, restaurant staff, and even fans told a very different story. Rumors of Corden's behavior started surfacing years ago, mostly from people who worked behind the scenes. Writers from The Late Late Show claimed he was dismissive and belittling, taking credit for their work and creating a stressful environment. Despite his fun-loving on-screen presence, many described him as cold and uninterested when the cameras weren't rolling. The biggest hit to his reputation came in 2022 when a New York restaurant owner called him out for his treatment of staff. Corden was accused of being rude to servers, yelling over minor mistakes, and even demanding free drinks as compensation for small inconveniences. The backlash was immediate, forcing him to apologize publicly. But for many, the damage was done, especially as more people came forward with similar stories. Co-stars and industry insiders also had their share of complaints. Actor Patrick Stewart famously called Corden out during an awards event, implying he was arrogant and difficult to work with. Others claimed he often ignored fans in public unless cameras were around, making his friendly persona seem more like an act than reality. In 2023, Corden stepped away from The Late Late Show, insisting it was his decision to spend more time with family. But with his reputation taking multiple hits, some believed he saw the writing on the wall. The awards, Darling's secret life. Kevin Spacey was once one of Hollywood's most respected actors. With 2 Academy Awards for The Usual Suspects and American Beauty, plus a starring role in House of Cards, he was seen as a powerhouse of talent. His performances were intense, calculated, and unforgettable. But behind the prestige, a darker reality existed. one that would eventually destroy his career. In 2017, at the height of the Number Me Too movement, actor Anthony Rapp accused Spacey of inappropriate behavior when Rapp was just 14. Spacey responded with a public apology but attempted to shift the focus by making a statement about his personal life. The damage was immediate. His response was widely criticized as deflecting from the real issue. After Rapp's accusations, more people spoke out. Multiple individuals, including crew members from House of Cards, accused Spacey of misconduct and abuse of power. The accusations painted him as someone who used his influence to intimidate and manipulate others. The fallout was swift. Netflix dropped him from House of Cards, removing his character from the final season. Studios distanced themselves, and Spacey's planned projects were either shelved or recast. Ridley Scott even replaced him in All the Money in the World, reshooting Spacey's scenes with Christopher Plummer just weeks before the film's release. Spacey faced multiple legal battles in the years that followed. While he won some cases, including a 2022 civil trial against Rapp, other accusations led to criminal investigations. Though some charges were dropped, his once thriving career was over. By 2023, Spacey was attempting a slow return, claiming he had been unfairly canceled. But Hollywood hasn't welcomed him back. The actor who once held the industry in his grip is now largely forgotten, his talent overshadowed by the scandals that tore his career apart. The Academy Award sits on the mantle, the star on Hollywood Boulevard gleams, but the police reports tell a different story. These aren't rumors. These are court documents, arrest records, and testimony given under oath. The family man who abandoned his first child. Cary Grant's image was perfection itself, sophisticated, charming, the ultimate gentleman. But court records from 1935 reveal something else entirely, a son he never acknowledged. Eric Leach lived his entire life knowing Cary Grant was his father. Grant knew it too. The blood test confirmed it. The mother, Virginia Cherrill, Grant's first wife, had the documents. But Grant's lawyers made it disappear from public record. The payments were made through intermediaries, never direct, never traceable to the star. Eric grew up in England while his father became Hollywood royalty. They passed each other once at a London hotel in 1962. Grant looked right through him. The check stopped when Eric turned 18. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. Grant went on to have another daughter, Jennifer, whom he publicly adored. Every magazine ran photos of the doting father. Eric saw them all. When Grant died in 1986, Eric wasn't mentioned in the will, not even as an exclusion. He simply didn't exist in the official record. The perfect gentleman had perfected erasure. The war hero's secret police file. Jimmy Stewart flew bombing missions over Germany, 20 combat missions, real danger, real heroism, but FBI file number 100-138754 tells another story about what happened after the war. Stewart attended communist meetings in 1947, not as an infiltrator, as a participant. The file runs 89 pages, surveillance photos, meeting notes, names of other attendees. J. Edgar Hoover kept it locked in his personal safe. The meetings took place at a house in Laurel Canyon every Tuesday night for 6 months. Stewart's name appears on sign-in sheets recovered during a raid. His handwriting was confirmed by FBI analysts. Then suddenly, it stopped. Stewart became one of Hollywood's most vocal anti-communists. He testified as a friendly witness. He named names. The FBI file suggests a deal was made, cooperation for silence. The file was declassified in 2001. Most pages remain redacted, but Stewart's attendance records are clear. The Boy Scout had a red period, and Hoover owned him because of it. The comedian's assault record. Bob Hope entertained troops, hosted the Oscars, made America laugh, but LAPD case file 1941-7823 contains testimony from 3 different women, the same pattern each time. Private parties at Hope's Toluca Lake estate, young actresses invited for career discussions, drinks that tasted strange, gaps in memory, waking up in guest bedrooms with their clothes disheveled. The first report came in July 1941. A 19-year-old contract player at Paramount. She went to the police the next morning. The case was dropped within 48 hours. The actress's contract was terminated the same week. The second was in September, a dancer from one of Hope's USO shows. She had bruises photographed by police. The photos vanished from evidence. She was transferred to a base in Alaska within days. The third report came from a script supervisor in November. She had kept her torn dress as evidence. The dress disappeared from the police property room. She was blacklisted from every studio in town. Detective Ray Patterson investigated all three cases. His notes indicate pressure from above to close them. He was transferred to traffic duty in December 1941. He quit the force 2 months later. Hope's lawyers, Kreisman and Kreisman, handled each case. The women received payments through a Panamanian shell company. The amounts increased with each incident. The silence was purchased. The records were buried. The method actor's missing years. Marlon Brando spent 2 years in a Mexican psychiatric facility. Not for exhaustion, not for method preparation, for violent episodes that Paramount covered up. The medical files from Clinica San Rafael detailed daily restraints, forced medication, electroshock therapy administered twice weekly. This was 1958 to 1960, peak career. The studio told the press he was researching a role. 3 people were hospitalized because of Brando before his commitment, a makeup artist with a fractured eye socket, a script supervisor with a dislocated shoulder, a young male assistant who never spoke about what happened in Brando's trailer. Dr. Ernst Zimmerman treated Brando in Mexico. His notes describe explosive violent episodes followed by complete amnesia. The triggers were seemingly random: a word, a smell, a particular angle of light. Paramount paid for everything through a subsidiary called Continental Artists Management. The checks were coded as location scouting expenses, 23 months of treatment hidden in production budgets. Brando returned to Hollywood in late 1960. He filmed The Fugitive Kind immediately. No one asked questions. The violence stopped. But Zimmerman's final notes include a warning: condition dormant, not cured. The All-American's deadly DUI. Henry Fonda was America's moral compass on screen. 12 Angry Men, The Grapes of Wrath, Young Mr. Lincoln. But California Highway Patrol Report 1955-4429 documents a different man entirely. The 3rd of December, 1955. Pacific Coast Highway. Fonda's Jaguar crossed the center line at 73 miles per hour. The other car had no chance. Maria Santos, 34, died on impact. Her daughter Carmen, 8, died at the hospital. Fonda's blood alcohol was .18, more than double the legal limit. The responding officer noted strong odor of alcohol and unable to stand without assistance. The test was administered 3 hours after the crash. The victims were undocumented immigrants. No extended family in the country, no one to ask questions. Fonda's lawyer arrived before the ambulance. The settlement was reached before the bodies were cold. $20,000 to a cousin in Tijuana, the only relative they could find. Fonda was never charged. The incident report was misfiled. The local paper ran nothing. The highway patrol officer was promoted to a desk job in Sacramento. Fonda never drove again. His publicist said he developed night blindness. His drivers knew the real reason. The guilt manifested in his hands. They shook whenever he sat in a car, even as a passenger. The dance legend's prescription mill. Gene Kelly could dance on rain-slick streets, but DEA File 71-8823 reveals he ran an illegal prescription network that killed at least 3 people. Dr. Harold Rosen was Kelly's personal physician. Together, they created a system: fake patient names, multiple pharmacies, prescriptions written for dead people whose identities were stolen from cemetery records. The pills went to struggling dancers and actors Kelly claimed he was helping: Benzedrine to stay thin, Nembutal to sleep, Dilaudid for the pain of endless rehearsals. Kelly took a cut of every prescription. Sandra Mills, 22, died in her North Hollywood apartment. Kelly had introduced her to Rosen. She had 47 prescriptions in 6 different names. The autopsy found 4 times the lethal dose of barbiturates. Tommy Chen, 19, collapsed during a dance audition at MGM. His heart exploded from amphetamine overdose. He'd been getting pills through Kelly's network for 8 months. Kelly was one of the audition judges. He didn't call for help for 12 minutes. Margaret Walsh, 31, drove her car into a telephone pole at 15 miles per hour. She was so sedated she didn't brake. She'd filled a prescription that morning. The name on the bottle belonged to a woman who died in 1943. The DEA investigation lasted 2 years. They had warehouses of evidence, prescription pads, pharmacy records, testimony from 12 witnesses. Then it all stopped. The case was transferred to an office that didn't exist. The files were marked resolved with no resolution listed. Kelly kept dancing. Rosen kept prescribing. The bodies were buried with their fake prescription bottles. The Gentle Giant's child support scheme. John Wayne paid child support to 14 different women. Not because he had 14 children, because it was cheaper than what they really had on him. Court records from Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Mexico City show the same pattern, monthly payments of $500 to $2,000, all annotated as child support in his accountant's ledgers. But half these women had no children. Patricia Marlowe received checks for 18 years. She was a script supervisor at Republic Pictures. She never had children. She had photographs from Wayne's hotel room. Pictures that showed what the cowboy did when the cameras stopped rolling. Susan Chen got payments from 1952 to 1967. She worked craft services. No kids, but she had recordings. Wayne's voice discussing things that would have ended his career. The tapes were part of the settlement agreement. Maria Gonzalez collected for 23 years. She was supposedly raising Wayne's son in Mexico. Investigators found no birth certificate, no school records, no boy. But Gonzalez had documents showing Wayne's real military record, the one that didn't match his public story. The payments were structured as child support to avoid scrutiny, tax deductible, legally protected, no questions asked. Wayne's business manager, Bo Roos, created the system. He called it the maintenance program. When Wayne died in 1979, the payments continued through his estate. The women had lifetime agreements. The last check was sent in 2003, 24 years after Wayne's death. The recipient was 89 years old, still collecting for a child who never existed. The Crooner's Mob Enforcement Service. Frank Sinatra's connections to organized crime are well documented, but Nevada Gaming Commission File 1963-789 reveals he didn't just know mobsters, he worked as their collector. The commission investigated Sinatra's ownership stake in the Cal Neva Lodge. They found more than financial irregularities. They found a ledger, Sinatra's handwriting, names, dates, and amounts collected. Tony Ricci owed the Chicago outfit $40,000. Sinatra visited him in Vegas. Ricci paid within 24 hours. He also spent 3 weeks in the hospital with a shattered orbital bone. The official story was a fall downstairs. Mickey Thompson had markers at the Sands, $60,000 in debt. Sinatra performed at Thompson's daughter's wedding for free. Thompson found the money within a week. His business partner disappeared the same day, never found. Jimmy Watts was a band leader who owed Sam Giancana $20,000. Sinatra invited him to a recording session. Watts left in an ambulance, punctured eardrum, fractured jaw. He paid from his hospital bed. The Gaming Commission documented 17 similar incidents. Each time, Sinatra was present before the violence. Each time, the debt was paid immediately after. The commission calculated Sinatra's cut at 15% of recovered funds. They had enough evidence to ban him from Nevada casinos, but the file was sealed. Sinatra kept his gaming license. The commission members all retired early, with unusually generous pensions. The action star's insurance fraud empire. Kirk Douglas didn't just make movies, he burned them down for profit. Arson investigator files from 1951 to 1969 show a pattern across 7 productions. Ace in the Hole. The set burned 3 weeks into filming. Insurance payment of $1.2 million. The fire started in 3 places simultaneously. Douglas was the only person with keys to all 3 locations. The Vikings. Ship burned in Norway. $800,000 claim. The fire accelerated with a chemical only found in Douglas's makeup trailer. He'd ordered 40 gallons of it. No one knew why. Spartacus. Colosseum set destroyed. $2.1 million payment. The security guard on duty was Douglas's personal driver. He saw nothing. His bank account grew by $50,000 the next month. Each fire followed the same pattern. Production running over budget. Douglas fighting with directors. Then flames. Always at night. Always total destruction. Always fully insured for more than construction cost. Insurance investigator William Sharp documented it all. Chemical signatures, witness inconsistencies, financial records showing Douglas purchasing accelerants through shell companies. Sharp calculated the total fraud at $8.7 million. Sharp's report was filed with the California Department of Insurance in 1970. It was never acted on. Sharp was transferred to investigating workers' compensation claims. He quit 6 months later. Douglas kept making movies and collecting checks. The tough guy's blackmail operation. Edward G. Robinson played gangsters on screen. Off-screen, he ran a blackmail ring that destroyed dozens of careers. Robinson had a partner, William Wilkerson, owner of The Hollywood Reporter. Together, they created a system. Wilkerson's reporters gathered dirt. Robinson decided who to squeeze. Their files contained 800 photographs, 400 hours of audio recordings, transcripts from illegal wiretaps. They had something on everyone. Affairs, addictions, things that happened at certain parties. Director George Stevens paid $30,000 to keep photos of him with a 17-year-old boy from reaching the press. The boy was actually 23 and a professional plant. But Stevens didn't know that. Actress Linda Crane paid $50,000 to suppress recordings of her discussing her studio head's casting couch methods. The recordings were made in her own home. She never found out how. Producer Martin Blake paid quarterly installments for 15 years. Robinson had photos from a party in Tijuana. What happened in those photos would have meant prison time. Blake paid until he died. The FBI knew about the operation. File 6-2-3847 outlines the entire scheme. But Hoover didn't shut it down. He used it. Robinson fed him information on suspected communists. In exchange, the FBI looked away. When Robinson died in 1973, his wife found safety deposit boxes in 6 different banks. Each contained files on different celebrities. She burned them all, except for one box. That one she kept. For insurance, the child star's adult film empire. Shirley Temple's dimples charmed Depression-era America. But California business records show she owned the largest pornographic film distribution network in North America from 1948 to 1974. The company was called Educational Film Exchanges, incorporated in Delaware, headquarters in Tijuana. Temple owned it through 7 layers of shell companies. Her lawyers created a maze that took investigators decades to penetrate. The network distributed 800 films, imported from Denmark, shot in Los Angeles warehouses, sold through a catalog system to private clubs across 43 states. The mailing list had 12,000 names. Temple never appeared in the films. She never visited the warehouses, but she signed every major decision. Her signature, disguised but verified by handwriting experts, appears on contracts with European suppliers, on lease agreements for distribution centers, on checks to performers. The money was extraordinary. IRS investigation 1975-234 estimated annual profits at $4 million over 26 years. The funds moved through banks in Switzerland, Panama, and the Caymans before returning to Temple's production company as foreign distribution rights. Postal inspectors raided a warehouse in 1974. They found 40,000 films ready for shipment. The paperwork led to Temple's lawyers, but not to Temple herself. She had insulation, deniability, the best lawyers money could buy. The investigation ended when Temple entered politics. The files were sealed, the warehouses were shuttered, but the Swiss accounts remained, growing, waiting. The gentleman's fatal hit and run. Gregory Peck was Hollywood's moral center. To Kill a Mockingbird, Roman Holiday, Gentleman's Agreement. But California Highway Patrol File 1947-2819 contains witness statements about a night Peck would spend 40 years hiding, the 15th of January, 1947. Mulholland Drive, 2:47 a.m. A pedestrian lay dying on the asphalt. 3 witnesses saw a dark sedan speed away. The partial plate matched Peck's registered vehicle. The victim was Thomas Hayworth, 29, a studio electrician walking home from a late shift. He died from internal bleeding before the ambulance arrived. His widow received an anonymous payment of $50,000 3 days after the funeral. Peck's car went to a body shop in Riverside the next morning. The owner, Carl Morrison, later testified he repaired front-end damage and replaced a cracked windshield. The invoice was destroyed. Morrison's shop received a contract for all of Paramount's vehicle maintenance the following month. Detective Ronald Pike investigated connections between the payment to Hayworth's widow and Peck's financial records. He found withdrawals matching the amount. The case was reassigned before he could file charges. Pike was transferred to San Diego within a week. Peck never drove at night again. His publicist said he had poor night vision. His drivers knew different. They said he would shake uncontrollably whenever they passed that section of Mulholland. Even 30 years later, the Rebels Human Trafficking Network. James Dean died at 24, but customs records from 1954 show he was running people across the Mexican border for profit. Not refugees, not workers, young men for Hollywood parties. Border Patrol File 54-892 details the operation. Dean would drive to Tijuana weekly, always in different cars, always returning with friends who had no documentation. The guards were paid to look away. The men were aged 16 to 20, recruited from Tijuana bars, promised movie work. They ended up at private parties in the hills. Dean got $500 per delivery. The hosts paid $5,000 per guest. Miguel Fernandez, 17, escaped from one party and went to police. He described the house, the attendees, what happened in the pool house. His statement was taken on the 9th of September, 1954. He was deported the 10th of September. No investigation followed. Dean kept detailed records in a notebook. Names, dates, payment amounts, who wanted what kind of boy. The notebook was found in his wrecked Porsche. It disappeared from the evidence locker within hours. 3 of Dean's imports died in Los Angeles. Overdoses, suicides, accidents, all within 6 months of arrival. None had identification. They were buried as John does. Dean attended none of the funerals. The operation continued for 18 months until the fatal crash. Border agents estimated Dean moved 200 young men during that period. Most disappeared into Los Angeles, never seen again. The singer's poisoning plot. Bing Crosby's voice soothed millions, but Los Angeles Police Department case 1944-567 documents his attempt to poison his first wife, Dixie Lee, to death for her inheritance. 3 different doctors noted Dixie's mysterious illness in 1944, symptoms that didn't match any known condition: hair loss, liver damage, tremors. Blood tests showed traces of thallium, rat poison. Crosby had purchased thallium sulfate from 3 different suppliers. Small amounts, different names, but pharmacy records connected them all to his secretary's credit account. She testified he ordered her to buy pest control supplies. Dixie's tea tested positive for thallium. Her face powder contained traces. Her prescription bottles were contaminated. Someone with access to her bedroom was slowly poisoning her. A nurse, Helen Morrison, witnessed Crosby adding powder to Dixie's evening tea. She reported it to police. Her testimony is in the file. She was fired the next day. She left California within a week. Her forwarding address was a cemetery. Dixie recovered when she went to a sanitarium for 3 months. Away from home, away from Crosby, her symptoms disappeared. She returned home, and they started again. The pattern was documented by 4 physicians. The investigation ended when Dixie refused to cooperate. She wouldn't testify against her husband. The police had everything except a willing victim. The case was closed. Dixie died of ovarian cancer in 1952. Crosby remarried 3 weeks later. The leading lady's lethal injections. Katharine Hepburn was Hollywood royalty, 4 Oscars, 12 nominations. But Connecticut Medical Board File 1962-445 reveals she administered fatal doses of morphine to at least 5 people. She called it mercy. The state called it murder. The victims were friends who had terminal illnesses, but Hepburn wasn't a doctor. She had no right to decide when they died. Margaret Sullivan was first, dying of cancer in 1960. Hepburn visited her New Haven home. Sullivan died that night. The autopsy found morphine levels 3 times the prescribed dose. Hepburn had signed the visitor log 2 hours before death. Charles Boyer's wife, Pat, was next. 1961. Liver failure. Hepburn brought soup. Pat died within hours. Morphine overdose. The prescription bottle in her room was filled with tablets from a different manufacturer than her regular pharmacy used. 3 more followed the same pattern. Terminal illness. A visit from Hepburn. Death within hours. Always morphine. Always more than prescribed. Dr. James Patterson investigated the deaths. He found Hepburn had been stealing prescription pads from doctors she knew, writing prescriptions under false names, building a supply of narcotics. The medical board had enough evidence to revoke licenses, but they couldn't prosecute Hepburn. She wasn't a medical professional. The criminal case required proving intent to kill rather than relieve suffering. The distinction saved her. Hepburn kept a journal. Found after her death, it listed 12 names. 5 had dates next to them. 7 didn't. Those 7 people all died naturally, or so their death certificates say.